Hello, I'm Joshua, and I'm an INTP, and first and foremost, I would like to say thank you for viewing this video and subsequently visiting my channel. This is an impromptu video, and I warn you that this will most likely be highly offensive, as what has given me the impetus to make this video has been dialogues I've been having with other atheists and New Age rational thinkers, or the supposed New Age rationalists, and the neo-atheistic movement that has been jettisoned as a social political, no, excuse me, not jettisoned, but derived as a social political movement by figures such as Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett, Richard Dawkins, and many others. And it's mostly within this scope and this group that I want to land my criticisms and so far as a critique of atheism. And this is to say that it's not to say that I'm not atheist, because I am an atheist. I'm an existential humanist, but I'm a secularist. I'm a secular humanist. I don't ascribe to any religious belief. I don't ascribe to any belief in paranormal or supernatural phenomenon. I don't ascribe to any explanation of things outside of a material, empirical explanation of things. I am a Darwinian evolutionary thinker. However, the degrees and the stretches that I suppose the degree and the leaps in terms of criticism and animosity towards religion that has seeped into the secular community is quite disconcerting to me and strikes me as rather unnecessary, irrational, absurd, and foolish in all its displays. I will concede that religion has had pernicious effects in terms of societies, insofar as that it has insurrected states, it has committed atrocities, it's committed its own forms of genocide, it has done its own sin and its own works in terms of the malevolency that it has assailed against mankind. But for anyone to say that secular states have not done anything in kind, or pagan states, or any states that have not been directly affiliated with the papacy or the church or anything like that, hasn't done anything in kind, I would say is an ideologue. As in, if you look at all of human history, prior to religion, prior to civilization, even with civilization, even post-religion, though we're not living in really in a post-religious age, but even with the decrease in religion, you do not find a decrease in the pernicious elements of mankind, because very rarely we're evolved things. If you, whether or not you're a Homo sapien that believes in a God, whether or not you're a Homo sapien that doesn't believe in a God, you have innate drives to you that make you interested in sex, that make you interested in status, that make you have a proclivity in terms of a reward system that's geared towards violence. You have a tendency to be short-sighted, and it's very hard for people to see the long-term consequences of their actions and their beliefs. You have a very real tendency to a whole number and host of qualities that make you pretty dang insufferable and hard to deal with if you're not willing to check your own character actions against objective metrics, rationality, keeping yourself in check with kindness and empathy at the heart of things, and trying to adhere to principles of integrity and maintaining the integrity of others, individuals, and their subjective experience. You don't do these things. I mean, anybody can do these things, whether being religious or non-religious, but very really, if anyone doesn't choose to do any one of these number of things, if they're religious or non-religious, it doesn't mean a damn thing. it doesn't really mean anything if, because there are people who, I've met people who are atheists who are awful people. I've met people who are religious that are awful people. I don't think being religious or being atheist makes you necessarily good at all. In fact, I don't think that there is anything inherently good about people necessarily, insofar as that they have a capacity for malevolency, and that capacity is not disappearing. They have a capacity for malevolency just as well as they have a capacity for beneficence, and in the modalities for beneficence or malevolence are just as much a part of our evolutionary history as is anything else. And I don't think that if you had religion or if you didn't have religion that you wouldn't have atrocities in mankind. It's just this rhetoric that the root of all evil is religion is completely false. It's not true. It's not true from a biological standpoint. It's not true to a statistical standpoint. It's not true to so many different ways, because you can fractionate the analysis and use different modes and levels of analysis to really check the problem of crime or evil or poverty or whatever. And it's not to even imbue intentionality or subjectivity to the thing, though this I feel is a subjective and semantical issue. It's just to say that if you're an atheist and you think that the eradication of religion is going to suddenly propagate any more levels of equanimity and peace within societies, you are foolish, as people tend to create groups and people tend to be discriminatory by nature. If you think that people won't discriminate in terms of race or religion, if you think if you get rid of the discrimination of race and religion, then you won't get other factors of discrimination, you're naive. I would say that you should read Brave New World or something by Aldous Huxley, because classes and creating dominance hierarchies and class systems is something that is fundamental to human nature. You will always have classes in some variety or another. It's like it's just, that's not going to disappear. And quite honestly, the idea of a utopia is stupid. It really is stupid. It's stupid because it does not. It says that it's irrational positivism. It's just irrational positivism, because there will never be a such thing as a perfect society. There can be things as equilibrated states, as in we figure out what's exactly wrong with us and how to best manage those things and mitigate their effects, and we figure out how to promote more so of the things that lead to fulfillment and the advancement of societies and maintain individual integrity and respects in relation to state interest and motives. We can try to figure those things out. But if you think that getting rid of any one thing or adding any one thing is going to suddenly make something perfect, you're stupid, or you're naive at the very least. That's just, you're very naive. The other criticism that I would like to assail against the current rational community is this, that very really, if you think that being rational means that you have any perspective that is more than necessary, as in you're not looking at sufficient clauses, you're not looking at necessary clauses, you're not looking at the sufficient and necessary conditions for certain situations or action, if you're not using statistical means, if you're not constantly doubting your position or putting things into different frameworks of consideration, then you're not rational. And stop kidding yourself that if you're atheist, you're a rationalist. There's so many times that atheism is considered to be a rational position, and I think that's completely dogmatic. Atheism is just the disavowal of belief. You just choose not to believe in religion. You choose not to believe in supernatural or paranormal phenomena. You choose not to believe in those things, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're rational. You can be just as dogmatic and as irrational as anybody else, and I find it just absolutely annoying. And I get fair, and I'm trying not to get indignant, but I find it, as somebody who is logically driven and rationally driven, I know that there is necessarily limitations to all things, and that there's some places where I just can't know. I can't know, and so there is somewhat of a choice in terms of, I say what's likely and what's unlikely, and I just lean towards what's likely. Is it likely that there's a God? No, it's unlikely, and it's much more likely that the material explanation for things, as they're the only sufficient means of explanation in terms of in terms of eliciting results in the environment that can be counted upon and can lead to the greatest pragmatic and practical benefit. There's that factor in them, but that doesn't mean that there's like this absolute objective logical necessity, and that there's absolute truth behind it. Science has a scope, and it has a degree of validity to it, and it should never be taken outside of it. And the idea that if you're atheist, you are rational is dangerous. That's just dangerous, because that's not true. Rationality has more to do with the individual psyche, and has something to do with the individual's constitution and choices by way of their own approaching of information and issues. That's one thing, but that's not true. And also the tendency in the new atheists to say that all irrationality is bad. There's an upside to irrationality. There's an upside to irrationality, as the tendency to be altruistic is not rational. The tendency to be kind does not have its roots in it does not have all of its roots in rationality. The way that we love our children, the way that we are social and affiliatal and construct communities are not completely rational. They do not have all their roots in rationality. To be honest is not always to be honest does not always have its roots in rationality. The tendency to want goodness, the tendency to want to be loving, the tendency to want to be a certain way of beneficial agency is not rational. To want to see the world be good per se, or have all good in it, isn't even a rational drive, as one doesn't even ask if those things are reasonable per se. But the idea of utopia is not rational. It's just the things being aspirational, being motivationally driven, or using the proper emotive states to inspire people to better themselves and lead them to different directions. That's not rational. None of that stuff is rational. Rhetoric is despite what people tell you, is not rational. Persuasion isn't rational. None of these things are rational, but they're good. They can be good, and they're necessary to the cohesion of societies and to the betterment of societies and things like that. But they're not completely rational. And it's just rationality has a place, is a servant. The irrational qualities of people are gifts. The intuitive agencies are gifts. The rationality is a servant, and the rationality should be in service to the irrational elements and the intuitive elements of life. So I think in myself, as this is the best, I think stands for equilibrated states and homeostasis, as human efficacy in terms of the in terms of the experience of the individual has to be at the forefront of a society's concern, and at the heart of the individual's concerns, and in terms of their motives and actions towards others. We have to want to hold one another accountable and protect one another's rights in some respect. It's not to say, and we have to challenge ourselves to uphold the responsibility that we have towards one another, ourselves, our communities, and things like that. As in the rhetoric for responsibility and the rhetoric for rights should sit in balance with one another, and it's something that's totally becoming lopsided in this current social political sphere. What can you do for yourself and what can you do for others should be the question to ask. It's just that the upholding of rationality and irrationality is important. This idea, I don't know where we when we decided to turn away from the Greek state, as the Greek state valued just as much as art dramatization the irrational and virtuous elements of mankind, as well as it did the rational and scientific and systematic agencies that these and the disagreeable and dialectic and rhetoric. Dialectic is the rational sphere, and rhetoric is the melding of the irrational with some rational qualities. It's just that the dialectic and rhetoric should exist with one another, and Aristotle wrote the tomes as collections of the same whole. It's just the tendency of the West to get totally one-sided and myopic is ridiculous. The other criticism I would like to say is that the state is not any better substitute than God. There's a lot of atheists that say they don't believe in a God, but they certainly believe in a state. And if you think religion is pernicious and has proven itself to be malevolent, well, I don't know anything in history that's proven itself in terms of tyrannical kings, in terms of dictatorships, in terms of even conspiracies and scandals within the thrones of democracy, in terms of the Greek state and the American state, as the Iranian-Contra scandal ain't too far in the past. I mean, just that the state is not a better substitution. It's just really not. And I'm not a Republican, so I don't want people to think that when I'm saying that. But the tendency for the new atheists to have an statist atheistic ideology, in terms of that be the mode and the means of their appropriation of information and their position towards reality and propositions, is false. I would also say this, that, it's unconstitutional to want to eradicate religion. That's one thing that really takes and holds me back. It's not like I like some things about mythology. I think those things can say things about human psychology. I think religion has some beautiful qualities when it's just considered as a narrative and an expression of the human psyche in some ways, as it's the propagation of the subconscious and the things that cannot be named and voiced but that have salience in some respects. Like, I think that it has its redeemable aspects. As one thing I hate too is like this. So before I get to the unconstitutional nature of the desire to eradicate religion, is this, that religion isn't all bad. It's just not. That's just stupid. I swear, it's unwise. I hate it when people say that. I swear, you gotta be so fucking naive to think that all good things come from the Enlightenment period. Or what did the Enlightenment period build itself off of? The idea of the self comes from the New Testament, per se, in terms of when the Holy Spirit finally came to mankind and existed in the individual, and there was no need for when Christ said, "Truly, truly, I say unto you that the true worshipers of God will no longer need a synagogue, but will worship God in truth and he said truth and he said that the true worshipers of God would not be in the synagogue, as in they would not be in any need to be dictated. They would not be in any need to have any revelation brought to them, but they would worship him in truth and love. I'm pretty sure, if I'm getting that wrong, I apologize, but I'm pretty sure that what he was saying that was the individual now has the constitution and right in of himself